This is July 29th in Portage, Michigan. This is an interview with Stan Suterko. I'm Rod Kossick. Stan, I want to thank you very much for taking the time to do the interview. And what we want to do is talk a little bit about how orientation and mobility got started. Now, if I remember right, you were in that initial group that started at Heinz in 1948.
Right, you're right.
And then, how many patients did you start out with in those first years?
If I remember correctly, we had a total of rooms of 9 patients available, but we were running about 4 or 5 for a while till we got our feet on the ground and everybody got acclimated to things. And then we were maximum with 9 patients.
Okay. And as you instructors were learning the techniques of cane travel, did you work under the blindfold a lot?
Yeah. Before we had any patients, there were 6 of us that started in the mobility program, had to use the blindfold every day for mobility, plus daily living skills. But we would pair up, and one would have the blindfold and the other guy would act as the instructor. And we traveled the routes that we were going to develop for the blind clients that were coming, or the blinded veterans that were coming.
When you look back on it now, at that time, 1948, when you opened, did you have the entire technique down, or do you think that you added refinements as the years went on?
No. As we started, we had a basic set of skills that we developed and shared with the blinded veteran. And I think those skills were largely due to Russ Williams and Dick Hoover and Warren Blutzel, who helped us with those. But as the years went on, we developed new techniques. And one of the things we did every year around Christmas time, Christmas to New Year's, when blinded veterans were going home for the holidays, our staff, our mobility staff, would meet in daily sessions to cover the techniques that we were teaching and discussing what problems we had and how to solve these problems. And I think that helped tremendously.
When you were working with yourselves in the training process, was it quite clear at that time that you needed a certain height of cane and that it had to go equal distance to left side and right side, and the timing had to be absolutely perfect?
Right. We initially, when you started with the client, you would guesstimate the size of the cane, but as he developed his skills, we made sure that the cane actually preceded the foot that was in behind and was examined the surface of the ground before his step would get up there. And so you did it initially, and as clients were a little bit slow and starting out in terms of their pace, but as they got more confidence, they would gain a little more speed to that because they were much more confident. And that's the time we really determined the length of the cane for that client itself.
Okay. Keeping the arm in center and having the hand extended is not a natural position. Did you find a lot of resistance from the early veterans about that?
No, I think it seemed like perhaps at the very few beginning, but I think as the clients, the veterans developed their skills, the new ones that were coming in would talk to the old clients, and the old clients would confirm to them the way to do this was to have the proper technique, was the hand-centered and movement equidistant from left to right to cover the shoulders.
Can you recall in those early years, did any veterans ever have a serious accident when using the cane?
No, I really don't recall any. The most problems we had with veterans in that respect is after they'd learned basic skills and gained some confidence, then they would begin to fool around with their cane, and inevitably they would pay a price for it by hitting a door or an abutment or something. They come back with a bruised eyebrow or something like that. Not when they were actually on the mobility or on their own mobility, but when they began to show off and demonstrate to some of their other colleagues that they could fool around with it. That's when they paid the price for it. We never had an accident with any of the clients that I remember.
I think the basic cane technique is so good that once a person's got it, they can do a lot. I remember in Vietnam, we were training blinded Vietnamese veterans, and we wanted to give them the full 14-week program. But after week 4, those guys went AWOL one weekend into downtown Saigon using their canes and the skills they already had. And those 4 guys made it through the weekend and traveled all over the city and went to coffee houses and visited people, and they had no difficulties after having had only 4 weeks of cane travel instruction. So I think the system is pretty good.
Yeah, well, I think we found this out too, that when they achieved a certain level of proficiency, then they would go out into Maywood or River Forest and neighboring towns and never had any difficulty with things. Like I said earlier, if they showed off and fooled around something, then they paid the price for it. But they knew that too at that time.
How soon after 1948, when the program was started, did you start getting requests from civilian rehab centers for this type of training?
Initially, there was a lot of animosity toward the Heinz program because of the mobility, which was a lot different from what the private or state agencies were doing. But as our veterans returned home to their own communities and demonstrated their proficiency in traveling about, that's when the other private agencies and state agents would begin to inquire about it. And I don't remember offhand, but I would say about 5-10 years after we got started, I remember an Anta Riemann from Sweden who came to Heinz, and she was a fully sighted instructor, and we showed her the mobility methods and techniques she did and learned those under the blindfold, and went home and started a program there. And after a couple of years, she returned to Heinz and was overwhelmed that every agency in the States didn't do the same kind of program. They were just learning. But ultimately, they did accept the mobility methods.
I think things did move rather quickly once people began to see what was available. And I'm wondering, when in your discussions did people start talking about a university training program?
And during the summers, the American Foundation for the Blind helped run summers programs for teachers of the visually impaired. And so going to San Francisco State for a number of years, and I can't remember offhand, in the 50s, I'm sure, that's when they begin to ask, well, the teachers at these summer programs who experienced under the blindfold the mobility would ask, well, where can we get a mobility instructor? Well, there none were available at that. So they began to pressure Health Education and Welfare Office of Vocational Rehab, why don't you do something about it? And that's when they started to provide funds to develop programs at the college level.
At that time, how many instructors did they think they needed to train?
That was very interesting because when they were going to set up a program at Western Michigan University, I was told that they would need 100 instructors based on 2 instructors per state. And I debated whether I should come because it wouldn't take long to provide 100. But I felt pretty confident there will be a lot more. Well, as everyone knows now, there's an awful lot more instructors needed and doing a wonderful job in the country.
Yes, and beyond that, we quickly saw that other countries around the world were interested in the long cane technique, and you were one of the first ones to go overseas.
Yeah.
Tell us about your England experience.
Well, I think as the status of mobility through the country here began to make inroads all over, some of the foreign countries would hear about it and come. We had a man come from England who was a very capable person but didn't have the mobility training. Walter Thornton was his name, a World War II blinded vet. When he came, I helped teach him to do the mobility, and he was very impressed, overwhelmed with it. Returned to England because he was a St. Dunster's, one of the war blinded there.
Right.
And he arranged things for me to go to England to start developing a mobility program there. And it took off from there again, England. So England began to develop, and we set up a orientation mobility training center there. And it developed. And from there, went to Paris for 2 years running to introduce them to mobility for a European country. And then I can't remember offhand because it's a few years back. But Australia became interested, and New Zealand became interested, and you were in Australia, so you would know, and the Vietnam too, and that's how things got going. And I think as soon as a few of the international countries got it, then the others were interested in it. It was a world night and day difference from seeing a trained mobility and a trained blind person under mobility versus one who wasn't trained, you know, just.
Yeah, and you also took the long cane behind the Iron Curtain, didn't you?
Right, yeah, that was quite an accomplishment, I think, because the American Foundation for Overseas Blind tried to introduce the mobility methods to some of the European countries, and they initially established a working relationship with the Lasky School for the Blind in Warsaw, Poland. And so I was fortunate to go over there and helped institute it. And I was very, very fortunate that we had some very good teachers of the visually impaired sighted people who took to the long cane, and they had many, many apprehensions about it, but they saw how it worked and were very enthused about it. But at that time, the communist government was still in operation, and they were trying to discourage them because anything from America wasn't necessarily good.
Right.
But fortunately, the students we had stuck by their guns and went to their own respective schools for the blind and introduced it, and the obvious proficiency was obtained. And when I went back 10 years later, the big complaint I heard from the School for the Blind there was the house mothers were complaining that the kids now on weekends, Saturday and Sunday, want to go into town with their cane. They don't want to stay in the building and the teachers or these house parents would try to tell, oh, it's raining, I'll make all kinds of excuses. But the kids had their independence and they were going to use it, so they would go into town, which I think was a good mark for the mobility program.
Yeah, I think that's a real testimonial to the efficiency of the long cane system.
Yeah, right. No, they did very well, and it's such a pleasure to see a blind person function with the confidence and ease when they go through a community compared to one who hasn't had the mobility, you know. And one of the things that always impressed me, after you train somebody and he's developed good proficiency, is to have sighted people stand there and say, how much can that person see? Well, to me, that's a good sign of that person functioning at a high level, and I always try to achieve that with every blind person that I ever, you know. Prior to that time, people would just say, yeah, I know he's blind, you can tell he's blind, but then if you see him, they would say, geez, how much can he see? Well, what kind of cane is he got? What's in the cane? They attribute it to everything but that person's abilities as such to function. You know?
I noticed that too when I was teaching blind clients, that most often the public would talk directly to the blind person and not even know that they had an instructor with them.
Yeah, right.
And I think that's a testimonial to the fact that they were moving along and finding their way, getting on the bus and handling the traffic signals and things.
To me, it indicated at that time when they would say things like, how much can he do? They're not accustomed to seeing the blind person functioning at a very high level, you know. Well, that's a good sign. I think if we can do that more with more blind people.
Through the years, we've had electronic devices and laser canes, and then we've had talking GPS systems, and along the way a variety of electronic devices. And we all thought in the beginning, at the introduction of each, that it was going to have a worldwide effect, or that it was going to help tens of thousands of blind persons. But as I look back on those, very few of those systems are in use today. That is, they never achieved anywhere near the wide acceptance of the long cane system. Why do you think that is?
Because I think some people looked for a total solution to mobility within the mechanical thing. But the main thing that anybody has going are his own abilities to read out the environment and to map things out. And the person that has the real high abilities isn't that dependent on anything mechanical or electronic they can function without. As the person that has all the problems with using his own senses to master the environment, he's the one looking for some device that takes this over, and there just isn't. And I've seen so many devices come and supposedly the answer to things, and I've trained some blind people with some of these devices. Well, they don't feel it really helps them that much. They can do as much with their own senses. It might enhance something, but if you get a device that also might give you some problems, you're better off not having the device. The real sharp person isn't looking for that. And I remember when some of these devices come, somebody would call and say, I have an 80 or 90-year-old father who doesn't do anything. He can't hear very well. He wants to learn the device. Well, he's the least likely candidate for a device. The best candidate for any of these electronic devices is somebody who's young and rural and has good sensory equipment, but he's the one that doesn't need it as much either.
Right. I look back at 1961 and 1962 when I was learning the cane technique from you. And I remember some things you said at that time that always stayed with me. A couple of things were, listen to the man. Yeah. You made it important that we should listen to what the blind person wanted to achieve and what they wanted to do with the use of the long cane. And also, you told us to listen to what was going on in their head when they were doing problem solving and what they were experiencing. We could see it.
Yeah.
So we didn't need to try to overwhelm them with our mastery or the fact that we knew the entire system, but it was listen to that moment. And that's something that I think you taught all of us, Stan, was to listen to that person and pay attention to what kind of problems they're having and what they want, and adjust your training to meet that guy's skills and abilities and interests. And that's real important.
Very, very important, and I'm happy and proud that you remember those, because that's tremendously important to help an individual gain his independence and mobility. Yeah.
After the programs had been running for a number of years, we ran into some financial problems nationwide about the funding of those programs. How is it today? Are all the programs, the mobility programs at the university level, are they well funded, or is it still in a situation where it sort of moves from year to year?
Sad to say that I don't know how the federal government decides who gets the grants to continue the program, but some of the old established programs who have over the years shown that they've gotten tremendous graduates who've done a good job on the outside, they don't necessarily get funded. But some new program just starting out here or there seems to have political connection, and they're the ones that get funded, and it just doesn't make sense to me to fund programs that haven't established themselves or really don't know how they're going to do, to fund those and then ignore the programs who have over the years established a tremendous record for good graduates.
Yeah, I think that is true, that at the highest levels, the people have no knowledge of how well the programs are working. They may look at some statistics, but I don't believe they really understand it. Today I was in Kalamazoo by the courthouse, and I observed one of the Western Michigan students under blindfold, and I was impressed by the fact that this student had good problem-solving skills, excellent technique, and moved with confidence. It was everything that I remembered it should be, which was having the hand out in front and centered, equal arc to left and right side, moving to the bus, on the bus, back out onto the street, locating the bus stop, and waiting for the transfer. And that was kind of impressive to see that the skills have not degenerated, and the type of skill level in teaching still appears to be very strong.
Yeah, good. I'm glad to hear that, because that was always one of my concerns, that initially people will feel the importance of these skills and doing them properly and carrying them out all the time. But sometimes some individuals feel, well, it'll be easier if I let them slop through and get careless with this, careless. Oh, I hate to see that, because the price is too high for being careless with skills and so forth. You gotta have good skills and have your head on to take in the information that's in the environment. Again, there are very, very few blind people who can afford the luxury of daydreaming, just ignoring it. You've got to keep your head on there and pay attention to what you're doing.
And I think having good, competent instructors who realize that and continually teach that basic cane system is very important.
Oh, tremendously, yeah, and that's why I feel that every instructor should assume complete responsibility for doing an excellent job. Make sure you give the best service and skills that you can to that individual who comes for service to you.
If we look ahead 10 or 15 years now, do you think that the cane skills are going to be much modified, or that the basic system is going to change?
No, I think over the years that has been attempted here and there, but it has never proven worthwhile. And I think they seem to go back to the basic skills that have been designed for maximum efficiency and functioning. So I'm sure that as the years go on, somebody will always try something new, but no, I don't think they'll take away from the basic skills. Not if they want to function with safety and efficiency in their environment.
Well, I think all that you've given to the field over the years is represented in the way that you've been recognized. You've received the Alfred Allen Award, you've received the Blaha Award, you've also received the Pioneer and Legends Award. I think that what you've done is to help establish a recognition, not only in this country but worldwide, that this system works and that these skills are valid. And to this date, there's no other system that seems to provide that kind of mobility for blind persons.
Yeah, that you bring up these awards, I kind of feel somewhat guilty in getting these, because I don't think any one person can accomplish that much. Excuse me. I think the rewards came as a result of our graduates that we had who've gone through the program and carried on the gospel to wherever they went, and they've done an excellent job there all around the country here, and even overseas like you did to Vietnam. Well, then it boils down to they give one guy the award, and really it's a team effort. I think I'm real happy with the students we've had and how well they've done in the field, and they're the ones that I think help bring the award to me. So I give them credit for that too.
Okay. Well, you helped set the standard worldwide, and that standard has been carried on, and I hope that it will continue this way for another 50 years.
Well, I do too. I kind of feel like I've sown the seeds, but the graduates have already nourished those seeds into plants, and then they blossomed out, and that's what's happened, I think. It's a pleasure for me to see a blind person functioning at a real high level, which I go down to the shopping center here and see one of them functioning at a high level. It's just pleasure. It's a complete thrill to see that compared to what I used to know way back when they humble along with the stick on one shoulders hunched over. What a world of difference, just pleasure. But I thank all of the graduates for doing as well as they did too.
Yeah. And Stan, thank you very much for sharing this discussion and your ideas about what's important in orientation and mobility.
It's been a pleasure, very rewarding feeling when I still get communication from some of my ex-blind clients. I know we've done a good job, or they're pleased and happy with it.
Thanks, Stan.
You're welcome.